My husband, Mark, was in Minneapolis for the week, and the Saturday had unfolded with a particular kind of stillness that always accompanied his absence. The house in Evanston felt cavernous, each tick of the clock echoing in the quiet. I was drifting through the afternoon, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, when I saw a missed call from Caleb. He was my son Ben's closest friend, a constant presence in our lives for years. A quick text followed, explaining he'd left his headphones at our house after they'd been hanging out the night before. It seemed like such a minor thing, so I located them on the entryway table and replied that he could swing by whenever. His apartment in the city wasn't a long drive, just a straight shot down the expressway, a simple errand. I barely gave it a second thought. My son Ben wasn't home, but that was typical for a Saturday. I had grown accustomed to the quiet. I'd never thought much about Caleb beyond his friendship with my son. He was a good kid, polite, a fixture in our home since they were both scrawny teenagers. To me, he was, and had always been, simply Ben's friend. That was the beginning and the end of it. So when the doorbell rang, I expected to throw on a robe and quickly hand over the headphones. But I'd just stepped out of a long, hot shower, an attempt to steam away the day's lethargy, and was only wrapped in a thick cotton towel. I opened the door to find him standing there, and for a split second, his presence felt different. My hair was still dripping onto my shoulders, and the humid air from the bathroom followed me into the hall. He looked momentarily surprised, but not uncomfortable, his gaze flicking away almost instantly. A sudden, unexpected tension filled the small space of the porch. "Hey, Eliza," he said, his voice steady despite the awkwardness of the situation. "Sorry to bother you." I managed a smile, clutching the towel a little tighter. "Caleb, it's no bother at all. Ben's out for a bit." I felt a blush creep up my neck as I stepped back to grab the headphones, holding them out to him like some sort of offering. "Here you go. I had no idea I was interrupting your day." He let out a soft chuckle and reached for them, his fingers brushing against mine for a fraction of a second. "You're not interrupting anything," he replied, his tone relaxed. "Just running some errands." "Are you sure I didn't catch you at a bad time?" I shook my head, a wet strand of hair falling across my face, and I pushed it back behind my ear. "Not at all," I said, the word feeling strangely breezy and unconcerned. "Just got out of the shower. Would you like to come in for a minute? I can get you a drink." I paused, the offer hanging in the air between us. I wasn't sure why I'd said it. Perhaps it was the loneliness of the empty house, but I went with the impulse. He hesitated for only a moment before nodding and stepping inside. He wasn't a stranger, of course, but having him in the house without Ben felt entirely new. I'd always seen him through the lens of a mother, observing him as a polite, dependable friend to my son. I had never considered him in any other context, and certainly never found myself feeling this strange pull of awareness. We settled in the living room after I'd quickly changed into a pair of leggings and a soft sweater, and I handed him a glass of iced tea. The conversation started lightly, centered on benign topics like his classes and the unpredictable Chicago weather. But as we talked, I felt a barrier within me begin to dissolve. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone in a very long time. I spoke of the quietness of my life, how the days seemed to blend into one another, how even when surrounded by people at social functions, a profound sense of solitude often crept in. For a little while, the age gap between us seemed to vanish. I wasn't speaking to my son's best friend. I was just Eliza, talking to Caleb, a man who was genuinely listening. We were two people sharing a moment of unvarnished honesty. The way he looked at me, with an intensity that felt both respectful and curious, suggested he was truly interested in what I had to say, in who I was beyond being Ben's mother. It was in that moment that something shifted inside of me. I began to see him in a completely different light. There was a depth to him, a maturity that I had never taken the time to notice before. A soft, almost enigmatic smile touched my lips. "Caleb, you've really grown up," I said, the words feeling both true and strangely intimate. "It's hard to reconcile. I still remember you and Ben tearing around this house as kids." He didn't know how to respond, just offered a small, shy nod. But a new kind of energy was crackling between us. Something unspoken, but undeniably potent. I could feel it. A subtle spark. A quiet tension that I wasn't sure how to interpret. All I knew was that I didn't want him to leave just yet. I stood up and moved toward the kitchen, and he followed a moment later. As I passed him, he caught the clean, fresh scent of my soap and shampoo. And for a fleeting moment, the label of Ben's mom felt completely irrelevant. I was just a woman, an individual with my own story, my own needs, my own loneliness. "Thank you for stopping by," I said, turning to face him in the kitchen doorway. "I think I really needed to talk to someone today." He gave me a gentle smile, and I felt a pleasant warmth spread through my chest. "Anytime," he said, and the single word held a universe of meaning. As he walked out the door, I couldn't escape the feeling that a fundamental change had just occurred between us. Something unvoiced had taken root, and I had no idea where it might lead. The next time I saw Caleb, it was entirely by chance. I was at the grocery store picking up a few things for another solitary dinner when I spotted him in the pasta aisle. He was holding a jar of marinara sauce, studying the label with a small, focused frown. For some reason, that simple image struck me with surprising force. How had I never noticed how handsome he'd become? It wasn't just his features. It was the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence in his posture. He seemed to possess a certain knowledge about the world that I hadn't seen in him before. I hadn't expected to run into him, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to act. We hadn't spoken since that strange morning with the towel and the unexpected conversation. But the memory of that day resonated with me, the echo of his attentive gaze and my own surprising candor. I had tried to dismiss it as a fluke, a weird one-off occurrence. But then he looked up and our eyes met. "Eliza," he said, and his voice was calm and warm, a gentle smile spreading across his face. It was the kind of voice that had an immediate, disarming effect, making you feel instantly at ease. I smiled back, trying to project a casual air. "Hello, Caleb. Fancy seeing you here." He gestured to his nearly empty cart. "Just grabbing a few things for dinner," he explained. "What about you?" It was a simple question, but it unspooled into a long conversation right there in the middle of the aisle. We talked about food, about our favorite restaurants in the city, about nothing and everything. But beneath the surface of the small talk, there was a low hum of something more profound. The tension was back, subtle but palpable. It existed in the brief, lingering looks, the quiet smiles, and then, out of nowhere, I heard myself ask, "Are you doing anything tonight?" I said it nonchalantly, as if the answer didn't matter, but my heart was pounding. I was testing the waters, pushing a boundary I'd never dared to approach before. I wasn't sure what I wanted his answer to be. He shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Not much. Just planning on a quiet night at home." A faint smile played on my lips. "Ben is out with his friends tonight," I said, my voice even. "I was thinking of making a proper dinner for once. You should come over. It would be nice to have some company." The invitation surprised me as much as it did him. My first instinct was to retract it, to laugh it off as a joke. After all, what did we really have to talk about without Ben as a buffer? But the way I'd said it, the genuine hope in my own voice, made it impossible to take back. Before he could overthink it, I saw him nod. "Yeah," he said. "Sure. I'd like that." And that was it. I had no idea what I was walking into. Later that evening, as I drove home with my groceries, a knot of anxious excitement tightened in my stomach. There was a vibration in my chest that I couldn't quite name, a feeling that I was about to step into a part of my life I hadn't known existed. When Caleb arrived, my house felt as warm and inviting as ever. The aroma of roasted chicken and garlic filled the air, wrapping the space in a comforting embrace that felt almost dangerously welcoming. I was in the kitchen, humming softly to myself as I stirred a sauce on the stove, a nervous habit I'd had for years. I saw him hesitate in the doorway, just watching me for a moment. And in that instant, I knew this was different. I didn't feel like the Eliza he knew. I looked the same, but I felt more authentic, more open than I had in years. "Go ahead and have a seat," I said, glancing over my shoulder. "Dinner's almost ready." He sat at the small kitchen table, and I tried not to let my nervousness show. I moved around the kitchen with an ease born of long practice, every movement fluid and familiar. He sat there quietly, and I could feel his eyes on me, trying to understand what was happening inside me, just as I was. It wasn't just about how I looked or the comfortable way I moved. It was about how he made me feel. Seen. As if I were more than just a mother and a wife, but a person in my own right. We ate, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. There were no stilted silences or forced pleasantries. We talked about life, about the winding paths it takes, and how rarely things turn out the way you plan. I told him about my younger years, about the career I'd set aside, about how much I missed the thrill of spontaneity, the feeling of being excited about the future. I admitted that with Mark away so often and Ben living his own life, everything had settled into a predictable, monotonous routine. A raw, vulnerable edge entered my voice as I spoke. It felt as if I was releasing words that had been held back for years, finally admitting that I wasn't always okay. He just listened. He didn't offer any profound advice or cheap reassurances. He simply nodded, his presence a quiet affirmation, letting me speak my truth. And as I sat there, I noticed things about him too. The way his eyes would light up when he spoke passionately about his studies. The genuine, unforced sound of his laughter. He wasn't just Ben's friend anymore. He was a man with his own thoughts, his own feelings, and his own life. "Thank you," he said, as we finished eating, and he started helping me clear the dishes. I smiled at him, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something deeper in his gaze, an understanding that went beyond words. "I'm so glad you came," I replied. It's been a long time since I had a real conversation with anyone. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just gave a slight nod. But I knew we were both thinking the same thing. A shift had occurred between us, a change that didn't need to be spoken aloud to be real. When it was time for him to leave, I walked him to the door and gave him a hug. It was simple, relaxed, and warm. But I let my hand linger on his back for a second too long, a small, deliberate gesture that I knew he felt. "Take care, Caleb," I whispered, my voice barely audible. As I watched his car pull away, my head was spinning. The evening had seemed so ordinary on the surface, yet it had unlocked something inside of me. I couldn't articulate it. I hadn't done anything overtly inappropriate, but the way I had looked at him, the way I had listened, it made me feel like there was something real growing between us. A different kind of connection. I had been in this house for 2 decades, but tonight, it felt like a completely different place, and I hated how much I found myself replaying every moment in the days that followed. I tried to push it away, to convince myself it was nothing. A few days later, Ben called and asked if I wanted to join him and Caleb for a drink at a local bar. My initial thought was to decline, but another part of me, a braver, more reckless part, was curious. I thought that perhaps seeing them together, in their natural element, would help reset my perspective. But as soon as I walked into the dimly lit bar, I saw Caleb sitting at a table with a few of his own friends. He saw me at the same time, and a slow smile spread across his face as he waved me over. Without a second thought, I waved back. His smile was relaxed, but it held a warmth that hadn't been there before, a private knowledge that made my stomach flutter. "Hey, Eliza," he said as I approached. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." I shrugged, trying to appear casual. "Ben invited me. Just thought I'd get out of the house. I didn't know you'd be here either." He laughed lightly. "Yeah, catching up with some old friends. It's been a while since I've had a night out." His eyes held mine for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and just like that, the tension was back. That subtle undercurrent that hummed between us, always there, just beneath the surface. I should have walked away, should have said my hellos and found Ben, but I didn't. Instead, I sat down in the empty chair beside him. We talked, we laughed, and we pretended that there was nothing unusual about the situation. Eventually, Ben arrived and joined our table. The three of us sat there, talking about his classes, reminiscing about old times, and laughing about the silly things they used to do as kids. Even with the lively chatter all around us, my mind kept drifting. Every time Caleb's eyes met mine, I felt it, that shift, that unspoken thing that his laughter or his glances stirred within me, something I didn't fully understand. It felt as if we were co-conspirators in a secret that neither of us dared to name. At one point, Ben got up to get another round of drinks, leaving Caleb and me alone at the table. I hadn't planned to say anything, but the words tumbled out before I could stop them. "So Caleb, how have you really been?" He paused, his smile fading slightly, and for a moment, I saw something raw and unguarded in his eyes. "I'm okay," he said quietly. "Things have been a little lonely lately." His honesty was a gut punch. It felt as if he had peeled back a layer, revealing a person I hadn't known existed, someone who was far more complex than just my son's easygoing friend. I nodded slowly. "I understand that," I replied, my voice soft. "It's not always easy." He gave me a quiet nod in return, and we sat in a comfortable silence for a few moments. It wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, filled with a shared understanding. I wanted to say more, to offer some kind of comfort, to lighten the burden I sensed he was carrying, but the words wouldn't come. So I just looked at him, wondering if he was just making conversation, or if he was hinting at something deeper. Ben returned with our drinks, and the moment was broken. But something inside me had shifted again. That night, my perception of Caleb was irrevocably altered. He was no longer just a friend's parent in my eyes. There was a different kind of light around him now, a dangerous and alluring one. Later, when we all decided to head home, I walked with Ben to his car, but my thoughts were consumed by that brief, intense conversation. What had he meant by lonely? Was he simply bored with his routine, or was he quietly asking for something more? As soon as I got home, I collapsed onto the couch and replayed the entire night in my head. That dinner, that shared look, that confession at the bar. It was then that I realized this wasn't just some random sequence of events. There was something else happening between us, something unspoken and powerful. And whether I wanted to admit it or not, I was being drawn into it. The most terrifying part? I wasn't sure I wanted to resist anymore. The next few days felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. I couldn't stop thinking about the bar, about the way Caleb had opened up to me. His quiet admission of loneliness, the way his gaze had lingered on mine as if he were searching for something. There was a weight in the air between us now, a presence I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. I kept telling myself it meant nothing, that it was just a strange coincidence of timing and circumstance. But I knew better. Ben and I had always been close, but lately, even when we spent time together, I found my mind wandering back to him, back to Caleb. I hated that about myself. I hated the thoughts that refused to be silenced. The way he smiled, the way he carried himself. He felt different to me now, transformed. That Saturday, I resolved to clear my head. I called Ben and suggested we go to the park and shoot some hoops, like we used to when he was younger. Maybe some physical activity, the familiar rhythm of the game, could quiet my racing mind. When I arrived at the court, Ben was already there, practicing his shot. He looked up and grinned when he saw me. "About time." "You're late," he teased, passing me the ball. I forced a smile and mumbled something about getting held up. We played for the next hour, a comfortable back and forth of joking and trash talk, but my heart wasn't in it. My thoughts were somewhere else entirely, in a place that was warm, soft, and deeply confusing. After a while, we took a break, sitting on the edge of the court. Out of the blue, Ben asked, "Do you think Caleb is doing okay?" He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow and looked over at me. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "He's just been distant lately," he said, his gaze fixed on the pavement. "Not his usual self. I don't know if he's stressed about school or what, but something feels off. I think he's going through something." The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd always seen Caleb as this steady, untroubled presence in Ben's life. But perhaps I was wrong. "I don't know," I said, my voice quiet. "Have you talked to him about it?" He shook his head. "Not really. Every time I try, he just brushes it off. I don't want to push him, but I can tell he's not fine." I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to confess everything, to tell him about the connection I'd felt, the change I'd seen in Caleb and felt in myself. But I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Maybe he just needs some space," I offered, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," he mumbled, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. He wasn't buying it. We finished our game and headed back to my house. My stomach was in knots the entire drive, a sense of impending fate settling over me, as if I were moving toward something I couldn't stop. We walked in the front door, and there he was, Caleb, sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. He looked up when we entered, a polite smile on his face, as if everything were perfectly normal. "Hey, you two," he said cordially, but I could see the fatigue in his eyes. There was a subtle rigidity in his posture. I realized he was playing a part, just as I was. "Hey, man," Ben said, dropping onto the couch next to him. "You doing all right?" I watched Caleb's face as I walked past them towards the kitchen. He paused for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Yeah, just been one of those long weeks." I could tell he was deflecting, minimizing whatever was truly going on. I didn't press him on it, mostly because I wouldn't know how to without revealing my own complicated feelings. My heart was hammering in my chest. I needed a moment to breathe, to escape the heavy atmosphere in the living room, so I retreated to the kitchen. But as I reached for a glass of water, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Caleb, standing in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. "Eliza," he said softly, his voice calm, yet direct. "Can we talk for a minute?" I turned around, startled. Yeah, of course. What's up?" He stepped into the kitchen and gently closed the door behind him. The space between us shrank, and I felt my chest tighten as he drew closer. I wanted to thank you for the other night," he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "It meant a lot to me." I swallowed hard, his words affecting me more than I'd anticipated. "Of course," I managed to say. "You know I'm here if you ever need someone to talk to." He nodded slowly, and for a long moment, Neither of us spoke. We were suspended in a thick, heavy silence that buzzed with everything we weren't saying. Then, as if to change the subject, he said, "Ben's a great kid. You know, he's had his share of struggles, but he's got a good heart." I nodded again, unsure where this was going. But his gaze finally settled on me, holding it for an extra second. The same spark I'd felt before was back, humming between us like an overstretched wire. "Yeah," I replied quietly. "He really does." He smiled, but there was something else in that smile, something I couldn't quite decipher. I wondered if he was thinking the same thing I was, and for a fleeting second, I considered asking him, asking what was happening here between us. But I didn't. I just stood there, caught in the charged silence with him, wondering where we could possibly go from here. Finally, he broke the spell with a quiet, "Thank you again, Eliza." "Any time," I responded. But a part of me knew that the word had taken on a new, more profound meaning. A week passed since that conversation in the kitchen. It hadn't been dramatic or loud, but it had stayed with me, replaying in my mind. Every time I saw Caleb after that, the air between us felt different, electrified. I couldn't tell if he felt it with the same intensity, or if I was just projecting my own feelings onto him. Regardless, the dynamic had shifted, and I couldn't ignore it. Ben and I went about our lives as usual. He would come over, we'd talk, he'd laugh. But it didn't help. Every time Caleb entered the room, my eyes were drawn to him. I started noticing the small things, the way his head tilted when he was listening intently, the way his eyes would meet mine for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. I felt it. Then came Saturday. Ben had made plans with his other friends, leaving Caleb and me alone at the house. It wasn't planned, but I wasn't disappointed. In truth, I needed the solitude with him. I needed space to process the storm of emotions brewing inside me. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard his voice from the hallway. "Eliza?" I looked up, surprised to see him standing there. His expression was unreadable. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, but my heart was already pounding. He walked into the room, hesitated for a moment, and then asked, "Can we talk?" That simple question made my stomach clench. "Yeah, of course," I said, setting my phone aside. He came over and sat on the couch next to me. We weren't touching, but the space between us felt infinitesimally small. The air grew heavier. The room felt smaller. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversations lately," he began, his voice soft and cautious. "And I feel like I owe you an apology." I looked at him, completely thrown. This was not where I had expected this conversation to go. "I know I've been a little distant," he explained, saying he'd been dealing with some personal things and didn't mean to put that on anyone else. I blinked, trying to read his face. "I mean, it's okay," I finally said. "You don't have to apologize for anything." He offered a warm smile at that, but something in his eyes told me he wasn't entirely convinced. There was more he wasn't saying. "I appreciate that," he replied, "but I think I might have crossed a line with you." My heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment I had been both dreading and, if I was honest with myself, secretly hoping for. I had no idea where it would lead, but I couldn't stop myself from hearing him out. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice softening, becoming more cautious. Caleb took a deep breath and looked down at his hands, fiddling with the hem of his shirt. "I think you know," he said gently. "There's been something between us, and I can't keep pretending it doesn't exist." I froze. His words hit me squarely in the chest, with more force than I could have imagined. Of course, I had felt it, but hearing him say it out loud made it real, tangible, and terrifying. "I'm not trying to make things awkward, Eliza," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. I'm not sure how to handle this. But I can't keep pretending nothing is happening." I looked at him, my mind racing in 1,000 different directions. Every rational part of me was screaming that this was wrong, that I shouldn't be here, in this moment. And yet, there I was. "I don't want it to be weird either," I said, my voice shaking slightly as I tried to keep the situation from spiraling. "But I really don't know what you want me to say." He met my gaze then, his eyes direct and steady. We sat in silence for a long moment. The stillness was dense, laden with all the things we couldn't bring ourselves to say. Then, I reached out. My hand brushed against his, a touch so light it was barely there. But it felt like an electric current. It sent a jolt through me. My breath hitched, and for a few seconds, I couldn't move. "This isn't just a crush, Caleb," I whispered, my eyes locked on his. "I'm not sure what this is, but I can't ignore it anymore. And I don't want to." A tidal wave of emotions washed over me. Guilt, curiosity, desire, fear. I was acutely aware of the risks. I knew what could happen if anyone found out, but the connection between us felt too strong to deny. And a part of me, a part that had been dormant for years, didn't want it to stop. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I mean, about whatever this is." I nodded, my fingers curling around his, my grip firm. "I'm sure." And with that, the invisible line we had been so carefully dancing around was erased. We didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. But the atmosphere in the room had changed. We both felt the shift, the immense weight of what we had just acknowledged. Everything was different now. It's been a year since that night. A full year of keeping our secret. A year of navigating the delicate balance between our normal lives and the quiet, stolen moments we carved out for ourselves. In some ways, it feels like we've lived an entire lifetime in those brief pockets of time. We didn't talk much about the us that had begun that night. What had started with a conversation on the porch had not faded. It had simply woven itself into the fabric of our lives. It felt strangely natural, but it was also fragile. Something we held close and protected fiercely. We had agreed on one thing from the very beginning. Our happiness mattered. And that happiness was built on a foundation of trust. A kind of trust that allowed us to be completely vulnerable with each other while keeping it hidden from the rest of the world. We had built our own little bubble, our own private reality. But the guilt never truly went away. Every time I saw Ben, a sharp pang of it would pierce the back of my mind. Not because I thought he deserved to know, but because carrying a secret of this magnitude always leaves a mark. Still, I never once second-guessed the choice we made. We both made it. And no matter how complicated or messy things got, it always felt right. Caleb and I saw each other whenever we could, which wasn't often. We never pushed the boundaries. We kept everything discreet, quiet, and out of sight. The hardest part was the performance. Ben would be over, laughing and telling stories, and we would have to act as if we were nothing more than his mother and his best friend. We kept our hands to ourselves, our expressions neutral. But those small moments, the quick, meaningful glance across the room, the subtle smile that was only for me, the fleeting brush of our hands when no one was looking, they became our language. Those were the things that sustained us. When we were alone in my quiet house, we would sometimes talk about what might happen if the truth ever came out. We never had a solid plan, just hazy what-ifs and half-formed ideas. But we didn't dwell on it for long. We chose to live in the present, in the quiet, In between spaces where we didn't have to justify ourselves to anyone, where we could simply be. It was a calm Saturday evening, almost exactly a year after our relationship had truly begun. I was at my house, sitting on the couch, the very same spot where it all started. The house was peaceful. Ben was out with his friends, so we had the place to ourselves again. Everything felt normal now, comfortable in a way that had once felt so foreign. We had learned how to exist in this new reality, quiet, careful, and deeply connected. We didn't need to constantly talk about our feelings anymore. The relationship had settled into something stable, something real. It was unconventional, certainly, but it had become something I couldn't imagine giving up. Caleb sat next to me, looking as handsome as ever. But there was a softness about him now, an ease in his body, a serenity in his expression. It had taken time, but we had learned how to carry the weight of what we had. We had grown into our secret. I had found a strange peace in it. I had figured out how to make it feel like home. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" I asked quietly, my voice warm and low, breaking the comfortable silence. He smiled and leaned back, sinking into the cushions. "All the time," he said. "Honestly, I still can't believe we've made it this long." I looked over at him, the initial shock and confusion I'd felt a year ago having transformed into something that felt a lot like gratitude. "It doesn't feel like a year," I murmured, resting my head on his shoulder. "It doesn't, does it?" he said. "But at the same time, it feels like this has always been our reality, like this was somehow meant to happen." I nodded slowly, my hand finding his. "Yeah, it's weird," I said, "but it's the good kind of weird. I never expected my life to look like this. But now that I'm here, I wouldn't change a thing." He tilted his head, meeting my gaze with that same look that always seemed to make the world stand still. "Me neither," he replied softly. "Given the circumstances, I think we've done a pretty good job. I'm glad we kept it between us." His voice was firm, certain. "It's ours. It's just ours." And he was right. That was the most important part. It wasn't about anyone else. This was something we had built, quietly, carefully, and together. "I'm happy," I replied softly, giving his hand a small squeeze. "We're happy. That's what matters." We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. We just sat there, side by side, enveloped in a silence that didn't need filling. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. A year had passed. A whole year of hiding in plain sight. We had somehow made it work. We had kept the secret. We had protected what we had. And through it all, we had held on to the one thing that mattered most: each other. As the evening deepened and the sky outside turned to ink, one thought became perfectly clear in my mind. This is how I wanted things to stay. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and strange and difficult. But it was real. And it was ours.